Great to be here. Greetings from Australia. So, first time I've ever had conference jet lag in the comfort of my own home. But it's so wonderful to be here with you all, and I'm excited to share my ideas. So, this presentation is an intervention into the enactivist literature, because I think that enactivism and biosemiotics have a whole lot to offer each other. But what I'm looking to do is to challenge radical enactivists on their claim of abandoning content and representation and all those good things, and try to bring enactivism closer to biosemiotics by using Peirce. So here is an overview of the presentation. So, as we all know, scientific development has long rendered Cartesian understandings of knowledge as ideas in the head obsolete, and I think it's clear that we need to move to some kind of embodied cognition. And enactivism is one such movement that's been getting significant attention and praise, but much current enactivist theorizing is arguably too anti-intellectualist. So various branches of enactivism, particularly the radical enactivists, hold that for knowledge to be embodied, it must be non-representational. So rather than any kind of representations of any kind of purported reality, they talk about quote unquote whole organism responses to environmental cues. But this defines the semantic against the behavioural, and this arguably sets up a false dichotomy, which ironically recapitulates Cartesianism. And then relatedly, so far enactivists have struggled to theorise so-called higher order cognition, which is logic, mathematics, hypothetical reasoning, and planning. So here, as I mentioned, I'm going to focus on the radical enactivism of Daniel Hutto and his co-authors, very popular here down under. This also offers a useful entry point into dialogue with biosemioticians, insofar as Hutto and mine in their 2013 book advocate a teleosemiotics, which they describe as a teleosemantics without the semantics. But having gestured in this interesting and tantalizing new direction, these radical enactivists don't develop the specifically semiotic angle of their view in much detail. So I'm bringing Peirce to the table to try to, work out more of these details and challenge the idea of anti-representationalism in radical enactivism. So what I'm going to come up with is an account which theorizes signs as habits of associating specific cues with appropriate schemas of activity and ensuing experience. Now you might notice there's 3 things there, which is not a coincidence. And I'm going to resolve the anti-intellectualism by giving all embodied knowledge some kind of propositional structure, although interestingly, this is not necessarily a linguistic structure. I'm going to draw on Sternfeld there. All right, so this is just a slide on why a habit-based philosophy is much more useful, I think, than an idea-based philosophy. So habit should be the kind of basic concept on which you build your epistemology and your philosophy of mind. So habits ontologically bridge body-mind dualism by being simultaneously embodied and intelligible. They bridge public-private distinction as simultaneously observable and introspectable. And they're also teleological, not necessarily in the sense that they have goals or ends, because sometimes a habit is just a repetitive behaviour, but in the sense that they lead into the future. They take effect in external actions unless a particular inhibition has been laid upon them. And this upends the usual approach to philosophy of action, where every action is kind of consciously chosen. All right, so some background in pragmatism. Sure, most of you are very familiar with Peirce's paper, How to Make Our Ideas Clear, where he lays out 3 grades of clarity that we can attain with respect to the meaning of our concepts. In the first grade, we can identify instances without necessarily being able to say how we do that. In the second grade, we can give a verbal or nominal definition, the sort of thing you might find in a dictionary. And at the third level, and a lot of philosophers stop there, and at the third level, we apply the pragmatic maxim, which urges us to consider, if a hypothesis is true, what experience should I anticipate? So the example that Peirce gives famously is the concept hard. First level of clarity, I can say this thing is hard, this thing is not. Second level of clarity, I write some kind of, dictionary definition, as you see here. Third level, actual expectations. If this table is hard, then if I rest my dinner plate on it, for instance, then, my food won't spill on the floor. So, key idea for this presentation. This third level of analysis effectively transforms every concept into a series of hypothetical conditionals, which connects a cue and a schema of activity and ensuing experience. In short, when given a certain cue, the agent expects that certain acts will be accompanied by certain experiences. So this is where I'm going to try to marry pragmatism up with enactivism. And here I've learned a lot from Sandra Rosenthal. She also analyzes in this way. So, for instance, we've got our diamond cutters here somewhere in India. And they expect that if their diamonds are hard, then if they're doing certain acts, they will have certain experiences. Now, if an agent engages in an act and the anticipated experience does not, in fact, appear, this triggers the agent to engage in learning. And so we have this well-known cycle of inquiry, cue, act, expectation, surprise, oh dear, surprise leads to thinking, and revision of the associated expectations until that surprise stops happening. And this is all, in the organism's lived experience. So the key, we can see here that the key to intelligent mindedness for Peirce lies not in consciousness, but in self-control. So Peirce views self-control as the capacity for an organism to be able to change its own habits based on, these inputs when its expectations are or are not satisfied. All right, so now we've got a pragmatic analysis of meaning, and this will form the basis of my new and improved Peircean teleosemiotics. So once again, Hutto and Mayan defined their teleosemiotics as having no content when they define content in terms of either reference, truth, or accuracy. And so I'm going to beg to differ on whether we should throw out all of those very long-standing notions. All right, just a few key aspects of Peirce's semiotics that I'm going to draw on. This won't be news to anyone, I'm sure, but he famously claimed a sign is not a sign unless it translates itself into another sign in which it is more fully developed. This is his notion of the interpretant. Now notice that we have here a formal analysis of intelligibility as repetition. And in this analysis, we can already see how signs are themselves habits of a special kind. Peirce also distinguished 3 different ways in which a sign can pick out its object: icons pick out an object by themselves resembling it, indices pick out an object by means of some existential connection, which is unmediated by further signs, and symbols pick out an object via some kind of arbitrary convention or rule, which does mediate the relationship between the sign and the object. Now, the functions of these, so these are not just different sign types, but they also complement one another in important ways in terms of their functionality in a meaning system as a whole.
5
so
more
the
minutes.
key function, sorry?
5 more minutes.
5 minutes? Okay. The key function of icons is to represent schematic structure by embodying it non-discursively, showing, not saying. Indices' key function is to determine what in the world a concept or proposition is about through some kind of existential connection. And symbols' key function is to represent general concepts which are indefinitely generalizable. So look what I've done here. If you think about what I was doing on the earlier slide with the pragmatic maxim, and I had those three components in green. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to align my previous analysis now with this icon index symbol distinction. So if we think about how and why organisms might have evolved habits of connecting certain cues with certain schemas of anticipated lived experience, I think, and this is the most important slide in the talk, this is what I think is the key innovation that I want to present to you. What I want to do is to align, on the one side, the biological act experience schema, the cue and the habit, with, on the other side, the icon, the index and the symbol. So now I'm going to try to just give you a bit more detail of how this might work in a propositional structure, drawing on the work of Sternfeld. So Sternfeld has done very important work on naturalizing Peirce's theory of the proposition, and he puts it in the broader context of a theory of DC signs, which extends beyond language. Just one example, photo of Obama in India is a DC sign insofar as it can be used to state Obama was in India, which I believe is true. Now, what is essential to a DC sign is that it's a sign which says something about something. So it has a particular double structure, which consists in an index, a pointer, and I'm going to say this is a cue with my other trichotomy, and an icon, which I'm going to say is a schema. And the two are fused together, thereby forming a symbol, so that something in the world is both picked out and described at the same time. So the classic sentence, snow is white, the index points to snow itself, and then the icon puts a picture, if you like, a schema onto that object and says that it has some kind of general property. But crucial to this account, I've just got a couple more slides. Crucial to this account is clarity about the logical role that's played by Peirce's icon as a kind of generality, which is different from the generality which pertains to the symbol. So an example of the generality which pertains to the symbol is the old chestnut abstract ideas such as whiteness that we think of as corresponding to a linguistic term like white. And then we get into the whole philosophical problem of universals. Is there such a thing as whiteness over and above the uses of the word white, etc., etc., etc. But Peirce, and I think this is one of Peirce's great originalities, he explicated iconic generality as a separate kind of generality through the metaphor of a composite photograph, a 19th century technology where the same photographic plate was exposed multiple times to create a kind of pictorial average. So here we have the beautiful film star of the 1950s, Joan Crawford and Marilyn Monroe, many others, and then of the 1980s. And you can kind of get that generalization of those different beauty ideals. Now, this is a specifically structural and non-linguistic form of generalization. And what this shows, I think, is that the real solution to Dan Hutto's so-called hard problem of content, which leads him to throw his hands up and abandon content altogether, at least for basic minds. The real solution is actually to broaden our concept of logic and information beyond the linguistic, and then we don't have to give up our notion of content. So so my final two slides. Peirce believed that habits themselves partake in this second iconic kind of generality. So habits themselves, this is the most controversial part of my talk, habits themselves embody a schematic logical structure, which gives rise to the schemas of activity and ensuing experience, the iconic insights, which constitute the meaning of our concepts under pragmatism. Again, I return to Sandra Rosenthal's insights. She notes that Peirce takes from Kant the fundamental insight that concepts are empirically meaningful only if they contain schematic possibilities for their application to sensible experience. But she also notes that Peirce rejects Kant's relegation of schemata to the imagination as opposed to the faculty of judgment. Rather, she says, both faculties combine to produce and mobilize schemata in a creative functioning of habit as providing a lived or vital intentionality between knower and known. Thus, lived experience reflects a semiotic structure operative at its most fundamental level, since human behaviour is meaningful behaviour. And this, in fact, enables an original account of objectivity and thus truth and reference and all those things that Hutto et al. Deny.
Now we're a bit on overtime, so you should finish. Thanks.
All right. This is my last slide. Objectivity is constituted by a composite photograph of multiple agentive perspectives on a given object, each perspective made up of these hypothetical conditionals that I outlined earlier, having its own subtly different yet structurally similar set of cues associated by habit to schemas of activity and ensuing experience. She says, in a sense, there are an indefinite number of cues, acts, and resultant experiences. Yet in another sense, they are all part of the one result. And this is how what is apprehended is not an appearance only, but a perspective of an object. So I went through a heap of material there. I've got a written version of this, which has a whole lot more of the detail of my argument. And if you'd like a copy, you're welcome to email me. Thank you very much.
Catherine, I see no hands raised, but now it's the chance. We have time for at least one question. Alin.
Thanks very much. This was such a brilliant presentation, I think, and
thank you.
Thank you. And it made the point so convincingly, and I think that what you indeed were also for what's worth saying, I think that you covered what I was hinting at in my presentation yesterday as well, and much more.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that I understand you very well when you say that the controversial part of your paper is the claim that habits embody schematic structure. But I think that that's what much of recent semiotics and embodiment philosophy has been pointing to, but hesitating to claim so clearly. And for what we're saying, I would like to, or pondering on it, I would like to ask, you rely on Stierfeld's work on DC signs, and you develop the argument, again, brilliantly. And there is something there, though. You seem to take on this, if we can call it bottom-up sort of modeling that is often suggested that Peirce would have meant that our thinking would start with icons and proceed, as it were, upwards to indices and symbols. And Stierfeld actually says that his taxonomy of signs, in light of the role that DC signs play there contradict actually this
Yeah.
build-up, that we would first encounter propositional structures, as your example with the photo of snow illustrated. So I'm curious to know more about your thinking on this matter.
Yeah, I mean, you're quite correct.
Thank you.
So yeah, I agree with that. So yeah, insofar as that agreement didn't come through in the presentation, then yeah, we don't disagree.
Okay, I think we'll have to move on now. So thank you, Catherine, again. And
thank you.